You are listening to a Sitting with Sue Insurance Questions Answered podcast. I am delighted to have with me today Angela Walker, who is a very experienced news reporter and journalist. She hosts an incredibly successful current affairs podcast called Angela Walker in Conversation and helps her clients launch and run business podcasts. For her sins, she is attempting to help me, which at my age and skill level is no easy task. Firstly, Angela, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your career and how you ended up having to cope with me?
Well, first of all, Sue, thanks so much for having me on the show. And you should give yourself credit because you're doing a really good job with your podcast. So I'm really enjoying helping you out with that. But first of all, I've been a journalist now for about 25 years. I started off in local radio as a local radio reporter and newsreader in Essex, straight out of uni. And then for the last 12 years, I was working at BBC South Today as a TV news reporter and video journalist. I worked at Sky News, I worked at the BBC News Channel, and I worked at Russia Today in Moscow for 2 years as well. So, I've got a fair bit of experience when it comes to reporting on events and stuff.
That's really interesting. A journalist's role is to report on events, whereas insurance is about considering whether there is an exposure to an event and then passing that exposure to insurers. Sometimes the two elements come together and an insurance related event occurs that is newsworthy. Unfortunately, over the years, I have been involved in many cases that have made the news, and I have even been interviewed and on television. Often, the journalists, adjusters, and brokers are all present at the same incident. The one pivotal person is the policyholder. The circumstances and outcomes of an event can be traumatic. That's to all involved, and the claim can also be long and a drawn-out process. Angela, have you ever had to report on events that you would describe as having had either short-term or long-term effects to any of the parties involved?
Yeah, actually, on a number of occasions, Sue. And I think the one that really springs to mind is the disaster at Didcot Power Station. So in 2016, they were demolishing the old power station. And while they were preparing it for demolition, one of the towers collapsed, trapping 4 men inside. And one of the things that was most upsetting for the families was that there were these delays in retrieving the bodies of their loved ones. And even today, it still hasn't been decided whether manslaughter charges are going to be taken against anyone who was involved in the process. So I think from an insurance point of view, you've got, what's happened, who's going to pay for the clear up operation, how's it going to be carried out. But from a kind of journalistic point of view, it's like, what's the impact on these families? They've waited for more than 6 months until the bodies could be retrieved because the families were told it was too dangerous to retrieve the bodies. And then they wanted to complete the demolition of the towers while the bodies of these loved ones were still in there. So the psychological impact for those families was just devastating. And that was one of the areas that I was looking at. So I think for me, I'm always looking at the human interest point of any story. What effect did this have on those humans, those people involved? And I think that's kind of where it differs from the way that insurance experts have to look at an incident. So Didcot Power Station, and that was quite an upsetting story to work on. And I think that's might be something that happens to insurance experts as well, that you go into kind of professional mode. You're there to find out what happened, to see what can be done to stop that kind of thing from happening again, what lessons can be learned. But when you go home, you think about what you've seen and the impact that's had on the people involved. So when you do work on a story like that, it can have a lasting impact on you. And other stories that I worked on, which were really connected with the insurance industry as well, are flooding. So parts of Oxford get flooded really badly every year, and they have got an alleviation scheme in place now. But I can't tell you the number of times every kind of spring I'd be there in my wellies reporting for South Today on the flooding in people's homes. And for me, the impact would be seeing these poor families who'd lost all their treasured possessions, who were basically having sewage pumped out of their houses. So that side of things, we're there to tell a story, and we're there to tell the public what's happening and to ask questions about, why has this happened? Why does this keep on happening? Is anyone responsible? What can be done to stop it from happening again? But for me, it's about hearing the stories of those people who are affected and enabling them to tell their own story, and to really you feel the frustrations that these people have when their home's flooded and they have to go through these kind of layers of bureaucracy trying to find out who can help them, who's responsible. So yeah, it's all about the people from my point of view. And one year, so it must have been 2014, I lived in Datchet in Berkshire, and our village was so flooded, and there was water coming up through the floorboards of the house next door. So I felt it from both sides, because that was really traumatic for me. And I was heavily pregnant at the time, and I was really worried about the water because I knew it was contaminated with sewage as well. And at the same time, my BBC colleagues were kind of saying, "Oh, can you do us a live update for radio?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, then." Here I am outside my house, ankle deep in floodwater and sewage, and explaining what was going on. And we had a lot of talks at the Datchet Village Hall about what can be done about it. People were so angry, and I was attending those as a resident, but also as a reporter as well. So I was really kind of feeling it from both sides.
And you're so right. But I think one of the things that people do not realize about flooding is that the water makes a loud sound, and it's the sound of the water. It's often not a gentle seeping, but a sudden burst of energy. So, Angela, do you think journalists help or hinder a situation when there is an element of trauma involved?
I really genuinely believe that journalists are there to help. Of course, there will be a minority who are just out there for some really controversial story, but all of the journalists that I've worked with in TV news, from a moral point of view, we are there to help people and to help tell their stories and to ask questions and to hold people to account. So a lot of the flooding in Datchet was down to a kind of flood alleviation scheme further up the River Thames. So the questions we were asking was, who signed that off? Why? Why was it not known that that was going to have a knock-on effect further down here in Datchet? So I feel like as a reporter, I'm there to ask searching questions. And don't forget that a lot of the work that journalists do, if they didn't uncover wrongdoing by authorities, we wouldn't even know about some of these things that have gone wrong, and we wouldn't know who to hold to account if it wasn't for the investigation of reporters like me. So of course, there are some people who might work for the tabloids. They're looking for a different kind of story. They're looking to dig the dirt. But for me, it's about finding out the truth and how can we stop these events from happening again? How can we protect people? How can we give people a voice?
So, for all the insurance related parties involved in what might be an event where the press are present, what advice would you give them as to how to react to the journalist and what to say? Oh, and let's not forget the actual policyholder. They're absolutely at the centre of all of this. So, what particular advice would you give to the policyholder as well if they're listening?
Well, the policyholder should be front and foremost in everyone's mind, because they are the victim, they are the sufferer, they're the person who has been going through the trauma. So we must never forget them. They should always be the priority. Regarding kind of liaising between the insurance experts and the journalists, Journalists want to tell the public what's going on. So if you have some information that's not commercially sensitive that you can give to the journalist, then why not? I would say try and build up a rapport with the reporters, work together because you're on the same side. So, not saying anything looks like you've got something to hide. So if you've got information that you can give, even if you're just saying we're doing our best to help with the cleanup operation and X, Y, and Z, talk the reporters through the stages of making a claim, perhaps. Tell them what the process is going to be for the people who are affected, so that people who are watching or listening to the news who are affected by, like, say, flooding, for example, will know, okay, I put in a claim, then this happens, then that happens, then they send round the dehumidifiers, and then this, so people can understand the process. So I'd say be honest and upfront, and just give them some relevant, honest information, because that's all that they're looking for.
Brilliant. Angela, you've been absolutely fabulous today. Thank you for joining me. And for me, the key points from today have been, firstly, that although the news event might be short and only take up a few minutes, the impact and the trauma can have a much, much longer effect. It might be months or even years, long after the news headline has disappeared. Secondly, you think that journalists must never lose sight of the fact they are not dealing with stories or statistics, but people and their lives. But actually, they're really there to help and to actually publicise something and let others learn the lessons from that. Thirdly, if a camera and a microphone are being waved at you, take a moment to pause so that your response is clear and honest, but also to do some work pre that actual interview element with the journalist, try to get all parties to understand and not to treat them as a foe, but as a friend.
Absolutely.
So therefore, just before you go, is there a question I haven't asked you that you wished I had?
No, not really. I think I'd just like to emphasize the point about building up a rapport with the reporters and not seeing them as your enemy, because you're right, we should all be working together, because at the end of the day, the policyholder, the person, the human, that's who we're all looking to help.
Fantastic. I definitely regard you as a friend, not a foe.
Thank you, Sue. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Well, once again, thank you to Angela, and I'm sure that some of these points will resonate. You have been listening to a Sitting with Sue Insurance Questions Answered podcast with Angela Walker. For my other podcasts, please go to www.suetaylor.co.uk. And for more information about Angela, go to www.angelawalkerreports.com. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much, Sue. Bye-bye.